Welcome back to Pursuit of Justice. On our last program, we met Adina Thompson, intake coordinator for the Innocence Project of Florida. I'd like to travel back to 1992, to the inception of the first Innocence Project, which was created by Barry Scheck and Peter Neufeld in New York City. They met at the Bronx Legal Aid Society. The project they founded began as a legal clinic at the Benjamin Cardozo School of Law. They learned about DNA while working on a case in the 1980s. A man named Marion Coakley had been accused of rape and robbery. He had a strong alibi, plus support from his South Bronx community. At the time, a new technology was being tested in England called DNA typing. The man behind that testing was Alec Jeffries, a geneticist. He compared DNA sequences from the crime scene to the suspect's DNA. In Coakley's case, the DNA was too degraded to use. Ultimately, he was proven innocent by Scheck and Neufeld using other means, but they saw that DNA could be used to both identify guilty suspects as well as being able to eliminate those who were not guilty. In 1989, the first DNA exoneration took place in the United States. A man named Kirk Bloodsworth, who was sentenced to death for the rape and murder of a 9-year-old girl in Maryland. Bloodsworth was the first person to be taken off death row due to DNA evidence which proved his innocence. Gary Dotson was also exonerated in 1989, the first to be declared innocent in a criminal conviction case. Just as an aside, DNA comes into play in cases only about 20% of the time. Evidence must be preserved properly. There is no statute where states are duty-bound to save evidence after a trial is completed. It is different state to state. I would like to mention some recent cases of exoneration around the country and the current number of exonerees. In an earlier broadcast, I referred to the National Registry of Exonerations, and that is my go-to website. It is fascinating. I think you could probably spend all day looking at the remarkable things on that website. They keep track of every single exoneration that has been recorded. And right now, today, as of today, and it changes day to day, there are 2,492 exonerations. And what they also give you is how many years are lost. There are 22,010 years lost for all these various people who've spent time in prison. So I wanted to just pick out the most recent exonerations, and just to give you an idea of how the different states these people are from, the different sentences they got, how long they served. And the man I'm going to begin with is James Chad Lewis Clay. He is from the state of Michigan. He was exonerated on August 31st, just, very short time ago. He was sentenced to 25 to 50 years in prison for a rape he did not commit, but he was one of the lucky people. He was exonerated in 2 years. Now, the next person is from Ohio. His name is Charles Jackson, and he was exonerated the 29th of August. He was sentenced to 30 years to life for murder, and he served 28 years. So look at the difference between the first two men. Now here's a man from North Carolina, James Blackman. He was exonerated on the 22nd of August. He served 21 years. He was sentenced to life in prison. And the next man is from Pennsylvania. His name is Scott Godeski, and he was exonerated on the 19th of August. He was sentenced to life in prison for murder. He served 22 years. Now remember, all of these men, and there are women too, are innocent, proven innocent. Here's a man from California. He was released on the 14th of August. He was sentenced to 57 years to life, and he served 6 years. And the last man I'm going to read is John Miller from Pennsylvania, and he was sentenced to life without parole for robbery and murder in Philadelphia. He served 11 years. So as you can see, the range of sentencing and how many years they put in some of these people is very, very wide. So each day, as I said, they add someone to the website. We talked a little bit in the last couple of podcasts about the causes of wrongful conviction. I know Kate Germain mentioned it in her interview with me, but I wanted to go into a little bit more depth. So the leading culprit in terms of the key factor in sending people to prison who are innocent is prosecutorial misconduct. That was not always the case. It used to be the number one factor was witness misidentification. That's not true. It's been pushed out by official misconduct. What does that mean, prosecutorial misconduct? Well, in 1963, the Supreme Court passed the Brady ruling, which required prosecutors to make all key evidence available to the defense. Handing over that material evidence is not always done. If material evidence is missing, and that evidence could eliminate the defendant so he or she walks free, the end result is that someone goes to prison who is innocent and the guilty party remains free. Imagine the consequences of that scenario. There are hundreds and thousands of cases like this. We heard Adina from the Innocence Project of Florida say that they get 1,000 letters a year from people just in the state of Florida telling them they are innocent. So we know there are many, many people who are innocent and looking for help. We will be taking a closer look at many of these cases in future podcasts. Here's a question to ponder. If a prosecutor withholds such vital evidence, are there any consequences for that official? The answer to that is no. Prosecutors alone are exempt from being punished. They have total immunity. There is now a debate raging about the power prosecutors have, which is unfettered by professional, ethical, or civil penalties when it's abused. And that is from the New York Law Journal. I read an article from March of this year. Another key factor contributing to wrongful conviction, according to this article, is misleading forensic evidence. Examples of what is now called junk science are bite marks, some hair analysis, and blood spatter. A case of guilt or innocence has been built solely on one of these factors. Sometimes there might be two of them, but it depends on the case. And now it has become evident that there is no scientific basis on which to build a case of guilt when it comes to this junk science. And again, we will be highlighting cases where junk science put a person away for a very long time or even for life. Another factor that used to be the number one cause of wrongful convictions, as I said, is witness misidentification. Research tells us that the human mind is not like a tape recorder or a video camera. We don't record events exactly as we see them. we can be mistaken. Parts of what we have seen can be altered in our memory. There are some fascinating cases which will illustrate this factor, and I promise you we will be delving into those in later podcasts. Another factor, false confessions. This happens often, but not always, in cases with juvenile offenders. They cave under pressure. They want to do what the authorities tell them so they can go home. Many times they are told, just tell us what happened and you can go home. Ultimately, that does not happen. Regardless of age, capacity, or state of the confessor, what they have in common is a decision that confessing will be more beneficial to them than continuing to maintain their innocence. There is a program on Netflix called The Confession Tapes, which illustrates this factor. It features taped confessions from real people, people who are innocent. Jailhouse snitches are another factor. Often a snitch is given a lighter sentence or even freed from prison if he or she tells authorities that the defendant told them what really happened. The snitch has nothing to lose by lying. If anything, there is much to gain. A jury is not always told that information about the case is coming from a snitch. And the last factor I'm going to mention is bad lawyering or ineffective counsel. Often lawyers are overworked, particularly public defenders. They are not fully prepared for a trial. They fail to call key witnesses, and they haven't put in the necessary time to defend their client. Now, I'm going to talk about another factor. It's not in the group I just mentioned, and yet it's a thread that runs through many cases, and Kate German from Centurion Ministries referred to it in her interview with me. So I wanted to go into this a little bit deeper. And I found an article in the University of Michigan Journal of Law Reform in 2017. And it was written by Catherine Judson from the University of Wisconsin Law School. And she talks about a term she uses. Kate uses blind bias. She uses confirmation bias, same thing. The subject of confirmation bias runs through much of wrongful conviction literature. There is bias in incentivized testimony from a witness, such as a jailhouse snitch. There is bias in extracting a false confession, where a suspect is told there's damaging information the police already have, leading a suspect to feel they have no choice but to confess. Bias appears in fraud perpetrated by lab analysis where results aren't what they seem to be, and in misstatements about what the evidence actually shows. Tunnel vision is another term that's used here also, describing a situation where the subject filters evidence that will build a case for conviction while ignoring or suppressing evidence that points away from guilt. Most of us do not like to be wrong. So we seek out information that reinforces our previously held beliefs. And here's a quote from Robertson Davies. The eye sees only what the mind is prepared to comprehend. We develop shortcuts because we're looking for consistency. Too much information is hard to catalog. So in our own way, we filter out what we think is extraneous and not important. It's impossible to verify every piece of information that comes to us. And now I want to share with you a fascinating case which illustrates confirmation bias or blind bias or tunnel vision. And it is the case of Jeffrey Deskovic. Jeffrey was accused of the rape and murder of a high school classmate in Peekskill, New York in 1989. He was just 16 at the time. He became a suspect due to behavior exhibited the day the young woman was found.